Welcome back to the channel. Now, this is a live video, all right, that I am doing. And today I want us to look at, all right, a project together, which is basically a project that will involve using Elastic Beanstalk, all right? So now in this project, we are going to be setting up a few things together. We're going to be doing a VPC setup. We're going to be doing a security group setup. We're going to be doing Amazon RDS setup as well. And we're also going to be doing S3 bucket setup, parameter store, Elastic Beanstalk, and then finally, we're going to see how to deploy our application, all right, using AWS Elastic Beanstalk. All right. Now, quickly, let me just explain to us, basically just give us a background as to why we need some of these things. Number one, we're deploying an application that requires that the data, should be stored into a database, right? So we have to set up a database for that. Number two, the application that we're also going to be using requires that people using our application, they're going to be uploading certain documents and things like that. Now the document, we want the document to basically go into the S3 bucket so that we can download from there later. Now the purpose of parameter store is basically that we do not want to add code our database credentials, right, into our application code. So what we want to do basically is that the database credentials, which is the username, the password, the database endpoint, we want to leverage parameter store basically to keep this credential secure. And then our application is going to reference, an environment variable that basically, connects to this parameter store and all of that. Now, the Elastic Beanstalk is basically more like a serverless offering from AWS that would allow us to basically, set up an environment where we don't have to manage, servers. So technically, we will not have to create EC2 instances, right? The Elastic Beanstalk will take care of the instances creation and all of that. And all we have to do is to deploy our application, on Elastic Beanstalk, right? Then after the Elastic Beanstalk environment has been, created, then we can now deploy our application, into that environment, and we can see how our application is going to work, That's basically what we want to look at, okay? So here, the first thing we want to do, of course, is to set up our VPC, right? We need to set up a network environment that will host, this particular application, all right? So let's get into that. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on VPC, to basically just set up my VPC. For some of us, your VPC might be, a default VPC that you're using. That's totally fine, okay? But then you can also use, any region, right? So basically, I can change my region here and go to any other region that I think would work. So I can come here and I can go to the Europe region, which is the Ireland region. And so here, by default, when you look at any region on AWS, right, your VPC, right, it's a default VPC and all of that. So what we're going to do is to create our own VPC. So I'm going to click on create, and to make the process a bit faster, right, to just make sure that things are, done very quickly without wasting too much time, I'm just going to come here and click on VPC and more. All right, and I'm going to come here and I'm going to give it a name. So I'm going to call these 3-tier, okay, and I'm going to change this to this particular IP. So 172.31.0.0/16, right? If you're not familiar with this CIDR, I will advise that you go to watch one of the videos, on the channel already that talks about, VPC, understanding VPC, understanding the Dextima binary, formula and all of that. You will understand basically what we're doing here. This is basically just a project video that seeks to enlighten us, on how to deploy application on AWS, using different approaches and all of that. So I'm going to select that. And here, of course, I don't need to do anything. So I'm going to be sticking to 2 availability zones. That's fine, because the purpose of 2 availability zone basically is to ensure high availability. So that, if one zone is out of service, the other zone can actually still, serve my customers without any kind of issues. And here, I'm going to be saying that I need 2 public subnets. So, and then I need 2 private subnets. Now, to quickly explain what that is, a public subnet basically is a subnet that has internet gateway configured, all right, in its route table. A private subnet, on the other hand, it's a subnet that has a NAT gateway configured, all right, in its route table. I'm going to show us all of these things by the time this VPC, all right, is created. Now, to understand what I just said, internet gateway, NAT gateway. Now, what is the difference between the two? Now, the internet gateway by default allows your resources to connect to the internet and also to be connected to from the internet. All right. A NAT gateway, on the other hand, allows your system or your resources to connect to the internet, but prevents any connection from the internet to, all right, your system. So that's basically the difference between the two. So you have internet gateway that allows your resource to connect to the internet and also allows external, all right, connection from the internet. And then a NAT gateway that allows your system to connect to the internet, but prevents, all right, external, all right, actors from connecting to, all right, that system. Okay, so that's the purpose of the NAT gateway. All right. So here I need 2 private subnet, 2 public subnet, and of course I'm going to say I want 1 NAT gateway. All right, for all of those. All right, subnet basically. I mean, I want 1 NAT gateway for all the AZs. So even if I'm deploying in 3 availability zones, I just only want 1 NAT gateway for all of the AZs. I mean, to reduce cost. Because if you look at what you have here, all right, it already tells you that the NAT gateway, I mean, it's something that will cost you, so it's not free, right? So the NAT gateway is not under the free tier, all right, in any way. So that information has been given to us here already. So we need to be careful, all right, and be very quick with what we're doing. And so here for the VPC endpoint, we don't need that. So I'm just going to say none. And all of these things have been done. So all I need to do now is to say create. And that would basically just go through the process of creating all of the resources for me. All right, the subnet, the NAT gateway, the internet gateway, all the necessary association, all right, and things like that. So at this point, I won't have to worry, all right, about anything, right? So, I mean, everything has been created, all right, for us. So let's go back there and let's see. So we're just going to wait a bit, all right, for these. I mean, it's sometimes going to take a little bit of time for these to actually come up. So we're just going to wait for the NAT gateway to get created. And once the NAT gateway has been created, we basically just come back, all right, and then continue with, all right, our deployment. Okay. So let's just wait for this whole thing to complete, and then we can come back and see, all right, what has been done. So it's going to take a little time, all right? So that's understandable. Okay. Let's just hold on a bit. The process is faster, but of course, it takes time for your NAT gateway to get activated and, get your, registered, because it's going to create an elastic IP, all right, that would connect to the NAT gateway and all. So let's just wait for that to happen and see, all right, what's going on with that. Just a little patience. All right, so you can see now that the whole thing has actually been created. All right, so we have the NAT gateway, all right, created. And then we also have, all the other things created as well. All right, so now we are done with the VPC creation. Okay, so what we need to do now, basically, all right, is to, what we need to do now is just say, click on view VPC. So our VPC here has been created. Okay, so if you look at what you have here, we have the VPC created. Okay, we have the VPC created. All right, and here we have the 3-tier VPC, and we have all of these things done. Okay. Now, if you come here under resource map, you're going to see clearly the details, right? So this is your VPC, these are your subnets, this is your route table here, and this is your network connections. Now, let me quickly explain something to us here. All right. Now we have subnet, we have route table, and we have, all right, network connection. Now, the subnet is basically you breaking down, all right, your VPCs, all right, into, different isolated networks, all right, just put it that way. Now, the route table is basically where everything meets. Now, when I say everything meets, all right, in the route table, it basically means that that's where all of the connection actually happens, right? Because, a public subnet is not identified by the name, but a public subnet is defined by the connection that you see, all right, in the route table. Okay. The same thing also, a private subnet is not identified just by the name private subnet. A private subnet is identified by the connection that you see, all right, in the route table. Is that okay? So when I come here to the route table, for example, and I refresh this, I can filter by my VPC right here. Let's click on our VPC. So that will show me just resources that has to do with my VPC. Okay. So if I come here now under this public, I can click on routes. Now, if I go to this public, this is a public route table, but a public route table is not just identified by the name public route table just because of, the thing is named public. But when I look at the connection that I see under route, and then here I see target and I see a connection or a link to the internet gateway, that tells me that this route table, all right, is a public route table. Because what I see here under target is what? Is an internet gateway. Because by default, going by the definition that I gave us earlier, an internet gateway allows connection to your instance, all right? And of course, your instance can also, all right, connect to the outside world. Okay, so here also, if I come here to my private route table, the reason why I would say that this is a private route table is not the name, it is the connection that I see here. So here I see that a NAT gateway, all right, is connected. So that tells me automatically that this is what? A private route table. Now, if I come here to subnet association as well, I can see here that this particular subnet has been associated with this route table. So based on this association and based on the configuration that I see under the route section, it is safe to conclude that this subnet that is associated to this route table is what? Is a private subnet. Okay, so the naming of the subnet alone is not enough to conclude that something is what? Is a private subnet. But when you look at the connection in the route section of your route table, and then you look at the subnet association and look at the subnet associated with that route table, you can then conclude that this is what? A private subnet. All right. And if I go here to my public route table and I can see the subnet association, I can see two subnets associated to that route table, right? And then I go to the route section of my route table and I see an internet gateway connection. I can conclude that these two subnets are what? They are public subnets. All right. So that is what tells me that this is a private subnet and this is what? A public subnet. And I will advise that you basically try to understand what I just explained because it is a popular interview question. Right? It's something that they ask you in an interview, or what's the difference between a private subnet and a public subnet? You must be able to tell them, all right, why something is public and why something is private. The explanation is what I just, all right, give to us right now. Okay? Now, we've deployed the VPC. So the next thing we want to do here based on what we have is to basically create a few security groups. All right. Now we're going to be creating two security groups, one security group for the database and one security group, all right, for SSH, right? But I don't think that is needed, right? So we're going to be creating one security group, all right, for the database, just for the database, okay? Because we want to protect our database and we do not want our database to be publicly accessible. Okay, we want it to be private. We're going to be deploying the database in the private subnet. So what we want to achieve is that we want to protect, all right, the database. We don't want to expose our database, all right, to the public. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come here, all right, scroll all the way down, somewhere around security, and I'm going to open up my security group tab. Okay, so I'm going to open up my security group tab right here. And of course, I have two default security groups here. And of course, we're not going to be using anything default, right? So create a security group. And I'm going to come here and I'm going to call this one, all right, database, all right, security, all right, group. So that's what I'm going to call this. Now, here, I can copy the same thing because when it comes to security group, all right, description is also compulsory. Under the VPC, I'm going to select it and I'm going to select the VPC that we just created, okay? So select that. Now, security group here is what you refer to as a stateful firewall. All right, stateful firewall. Now, what is a stateful firewall? A stateful firewall basically means that when it comes to defining your rules, right, the outbound, okay, or the egress is not necessarily defined, right? Which means you don't have to specifically or explicitly define your egress. What is important is to define your inbound rule. That is what is important, which means whatever it is you allow in automatically is allowed out, right? Think about it like when you invite somebody to your event, right? You give the person an IV. That IV basically allows them into the event, right? But by the time the person is leaving that event, I mean, nobody checks, whether this person should leave or not, right? Except there is, some other issue, right? But of course, by the time the person gets to the gate or to the door of your event and then presents the invitation, the person is what? Allowed in. So by the time the person is leaving, the person does not have to show, all right, any IV to say, oh, I'm going, this is the IV. No. Basically, the moment they are admitted into the event, they can leave anytime, all right, they want. So the security group also does, all right, the same thing. So it basically allows people to coming into your service, do whatever it is you want them to do based on the rules defined in the inbound. The outbound can, sometimes not configure, basically. Okay. So here I'm going to click on inbound, and I'm going to come here, and we're going to choose MySQL because that's the database that we're using. So MySQL. So the port is 3306. That's the port number. And here I'm basically going to come here. For now, I'm going to say, all right, from my own IP. That's what I'm going to do. All right, just for now. All right. So I'm going to copy this name and create a tag. I mean, just to identify our resources. All right. And then I'm going to come here and say create security group. Now, I've created a security group that would allow, all right, my database to connect. So this is the security group that we're going to be using for the database. So the next thing we need to do here is to basically create, all right, our database, right? That's the next thing we want to do. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to go to RDS right here. All right, click on RDS. Okay, so click on RDS, and that is going to open up, all right, this particular page for us. All right, that will allow us to create RDS. So click that. Okay. Now here we want to deploy, all right, our RDS. So how do we go about, all right, the RDS deployment, basically? Okay. So here we want to deploy RDS. Now, when you want to create an RDS, what are the things that you need to do? All right. What are the things that you need to take note, all right, of? Basically. Now, when you're creating an RDS, first of all, you have to create what you call a subnet group. All right. So click on subnet group, and then create a database subnet group. So a subnet group basically is you want to create more like, the VPCs or the subnet that you want to deploy your database in, actually. So that is what the subnet group, all right, is. So you want to create, more like a group, all right, that would define the subnet where you want to have your database created. Okay. So here I'm going to give it a name. So I'm just going to call these, simple names, so like 3-tier, all right, subnet or DB, all right, subnet group. So the VPC again is going to be the VPC that we just created, 3-tier. Availability zones, we use 2 availability zones. So I guess that should be, so I can go back to my VPC, all right, go back to my subnet, and I can see that I have my subnet created in 1A and 1B. Okay, so I'm going to come here, where's that? Subnet group, and I'm going to choose 1A and 1B. And of course, I have to specify my subnet. Now, remember, we are deploying this database, all right, into the private subnet. Okay, so I'm going to come here under my subnet. I need to identify my private subnet. So I have this private subnet 1B, which is 9E5D, and I have this other private subnet, which is 40BA. So these are the 2, subnet that I'm adding into that subnet group, right? So now E5D, okay? So I'm going to come here and I'm going to select now E5D. And the other one here is 40BA, right? And I'm going to come here and select that 40BA. So select those two, okay? And then create your subnet group. Oh, okay, so the subnet description must be provided. All right, so we can just copy this name and put it right here. I mean, that's not a problem. So let's create. All right, so the subnet group has been created. So now we can click on database, all right, and then create database. Okay, create a database. So we're going to be using my SQL database, all right, my SQL as the database we're using. And then here, I'm going to scroll down. So engine version. So basically the version of the database that you want to use, right? So I'm going to select 8.0.36. It is advisable to always, not use the latest version, all right, when you're deploying any application. It is advisable that you go with the long-term version or the stable version, okay? So I'm going to be going with this one. I mean, that's still stable. It's been extensively tested, okay? And here, I'm going to be going with a free tier just to minimize the cost. We're already paying for the NAT gateway, so we need to use the free tier here to minimize, all right, our cost. And so here, again, the database identifier. So this is the instance identifier. So basically the name of your database instance. Now, this RDS is what you can call, all right, a managed database, because here we are not managing any EC2 instance, okay? AWS is taking care of that instance for us. The only thing we need to do is to give our instance a name and then to choose the instance type that we want to use to run our database, right? But as far as accessing this database instance is concerned, we don't have access to that. AWS is managing that, all right, part for us, okay? So the database instance name is just like the name of your instance, just like you're creating an EC2 instance and then you're giving that, all right, a name. So here I'm just I can leave this as is. I mean, it doesn't mean, you can change it, you can leave it, whatever it is. Now here, we need to specify the master username and the password. All right. So by default, I'm going to go with admin. I mean, just to keep things simple. And here, I'm going to, all right. Now you can use the secret manager, which is the most secure. But in our own case, we're going to be using parameter store, which is more like the secret manager. All right. But of course, they have some similarities, and then they have some differences. Okay. So I'm going to say auto-generate password. I mean, I don't want to create any password myself. I'm going to be auto-generating the password. And then I'm going to take the password and the endpoint and the username. I'm going to put that in my parameter store. Okay, of course, going with the secret manager is the most secure, right? But of course, in later videos, we will touch, all right, on that. Okay, so I'm going to be auto-generating the password right here. And we leave that as is. Now here, under this particular session, I'm going to choose my DBT3 micro because that is under the free tier, right? So I'm going to choose that. Now for storage, I can leave storage as is. I can scroll down here. Now I'm not connecting any EC2 instance to my database. So I'm going to say don't connect to EC2 instance. I'm using IPv4. All right. And then here, I need to select my VPC. Okay. So here I'm going to select here and then select the VPC that we created, all right, earlier. So select that. Now, of course, automatically it has seen the DB subnet group that we created. So it has picked that up already. For the public access, I'm going to say no, all right? I don't want any public access, right? So it's just going to be no. And then for the VPC security group, I'm going to use an existing security group. So here, I'm going to create the database. I'm going to choose, right, the database, all right, security group. For availability zone, I don't have any preference. I mean, I don't have any preferences. You can put it in any zone that it wants, all right, based on the subnet group that we have created here, right? So is it going to create it in A or in B? All right. So here, I don't need to do any other thing. Password identification is what we're going to choose. And now under additional configuration, I need to create, all right, an initial, all right, database. So I can call my database, all right, contact form. So that's the initial database now, the DB that will hold our data, right? All the things that we've been doing, all right, up to, from the beginning up to this point is basically configuring the instance of our database. But now we need to actually create, all right, an initial database that our application is going to use to store, all right, its data. Is that okay? So yeah, it's going to be contact form. And of course, for backup, I'm going to check that. I don't need to do any backup since I'm going to delete this after the session. And that's all we need to do. All right. And then we can create your database. All right. Now, while the database, all right, is getting created, let me just come here to explain something to us. Now, in this setup, we need S3 bucket, right? So now, that means that our application will have to reference the S3 bucket in order to put, okay, all the uploads into the S3 bucket. Now, our application is also going to need to read, all right, the parameter store to fetch the database credentials in order for all the data to be stored into the database. Right? So that means in addition to creating all of these things, we need to find a way to allow our Elastic Beanstalk application, right, to talk to parameter store and also to talk to what? To the S3 bucket, right? We're going to be connecting to the database using username and password, and that will be fetched from parameter store, right? And then our application also has a requirement to put something into, all right, the S3 bucket. So that means Elastic Beanstalk as a service on AWS has to talk to the parameter store service, and at the same time also has to talk, all right, to the S3 bucket, right? So how do we do that? How can we configure, all right, that, communication between these services, all right, of AWS? We need to find a way to go about that, right? So let's see how that can be done. So here, I'm going to come here and I'm going to search for IAM. So basically what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to create an IAM role, right? I'm going to create what? An IAM role that would allow my Elastic Beanstalk, all right, to communicate with parameter store and my S3 bucket, right? Very, very important, because without the IAM role, there's no way my Elastic Beanstalk application, all right, will be able to relate to parameter store to fetch the database credentials, all right, and my S3 bucket, of course, there's no way the Elastic Beanstalk will be able to talk, all right, to my S3 bucket. So I need to create a role that the Elastic Beanstalk service is going to assume that will give the Elastic Beanstalk the privilege, all right, to relate with parameter store and my S3 bucket, right? So click on roles here. All right, click on roles. And then here, click on create a role. And the role is going to be of type AWS service, right? And the service here, the use case is going to be EC2. All right. I mean, there are a lot of other use cases, right? But for the purpose of what we're doing, it's going to be EC2. And then we're going to click on next. And here there are two, all right, permissions that we want to select. Now, if you don't know anything about permission just yet, I will really, really advise that you go through, all right, the video that I, released. I think the last video that I released last week Friday that talks about IAM roles, permissions, and all of that. It is actually on the channel, so you can go there and just watch, and understand what an IAM role is, what an IAM permission is, and all of that. I mean, I talked in details, right, about the permissions, the roles, and all of that. So take a look at the the videos on the channel, and then of course do yourself that favor, all right, of going through all of that. Okay, so here I'm going to select two permissions. So the first one is going to be S3 full access. Now, going with S3 full access is going to negate the principle of least privilege, okay? Because, I mean, the only thing my application needs to do, all right, is to put object, all right, into my bucket. So going with the full access is not best practice. But for the purpose of learning, all right, let's just go ahead with that, okay? Full access. And here, I'm also going to search for SSM, all right, the read only. So that's going to be read only access. All right. So this permission is actually going to allow my Elastic Beanstalk application to read, okay, my parameter store to fetch the database credentials. All right. So I'm going to click on next. And then here, I'm just going to basically say, all right, give the name. So web app. All right. So let's just say web app role. Okay. I mean, just a simple name actually. And then I'm going to create the role. So now the role has been created, okay? So that's done. So I mean, we can leave that now. Now let's go back to database. So here, our database has also, all right, been created. So we can see the connection details right here. So there's the master password and this is the endpoint, all right? So I'm going to close this and I'm going to come here to my parameter store. Oh, sorry. I mean, sorry. So I'm supposed to come here. So parameter store. All right. So parameter store. I need to go there and open that up. Now, what I'm showing you here is actually best practice. I mean, it is best practice, all right, to basically not add code any kind of credential in your application code, right? That is best practice. I mean, it doesn't make sense, all right, for you to add code, all right, any credential in your application code, right? Because I mean, because the application code is going to be checked into the Git repository. That means anybody that has access to that repository can actually see all your credentials, right? So the best way to manage it is to actually outsource, all right, your credentials and then reference, all right, your credential within your application code. So that way, even if your application code is on GitHub and somebody has access to it, they will not be able to, all right, see your credentials and add, all right, into your system. So that is basically what we're trying to do here. So create parameter store. Now, when you're creating a parameter store, let me quickly show you something here. Now, here in my application code, I have this env file, which is basically, all right, my environment variable. Okay, so that is this environment variable, right? So inside of this environment variable, I have some variables here so that are referenced in my code, basically. So if I go here to my process.php, all right, I can see here, it says get parameter SSM, and then it's getting the parameter from here. Now, you don't have to bother about all of this code. I mean, this is the job of your programmer, basically, right? I'm just showing you this, all right, just basically to give you something practical, something that actually happens, all right, in real life, okay? So that's why I'm showing you all of these things so that you can see how applications are actually deployed, all right, in a real world, all right, environment. I mean, we need to do this. So here, I'm basically referencing the variables that I have defined here, okay? And so my parameter store is defined using this particular slash part, right? So slash contact form, it can be any name really. It doesn't have to be the name that I'm using here. It can be your own company name. It can be the name of your application. It can be anything. The most important thing is that your application is able to read, all right, this particular credential. So I'm going to copy that name. So my DB host, I'm going to put it here. Oops. So I'm going to copy this. So just copy this line here. All right, copy that and put it here. So the DB host is going to be, all right, the endpoint of your database. So copy that, go back to parameter store, scroll all the way down. And here I'm going to say it's going to be what? Of type secure, all right, string. Just 1 minute, guys. 1 minute. So here I'm going to say that it is going to be of the type, all right, secure, all right, string. Okay, that's the type. Because I mean, I want to protect my credentials, right? So it's going to be of the type secure string, and then I will copy the value here, all right, and then say create parameter. So the first parameter has been created. So the second parameter we need to create, of course, is the username. I mean, the purpose of this is that we don't want to add code or add anything. So create parameter, pull it here, and of course, you can say secure string as well. And then the value of that is basically admin. And then here, I'm going to say create parameter. Now, the next one is the password, right? So copy that. All right, come back to your parameter, create that, put it here. All right, and then secure string, of course, your password should be secured, right? And then here you copy the master password, and then you put that here, and then you say create parameter. Now, the last one we need to create is the database, all right, name. I mean, the initial database that we created, okay? So put that here, say that a secure string, and that initial database can actually, you can get that by clicking on your database from here, all right, and then go to configuration, and right here, you can see your database name right here. So you can copy this name, contact form, that's the database name. Copy that, go to parameter, all right, and then put the value here, and then create your parameter. So we have all these 4 parameters created, the DB host, the DB name, the DB password, and the DB username, and we are referencing that exactly, all right, in the environment variable that our application is going to be referencing. All right, so that has been done. So the next thing now is to create our S3 bucket that will basically store all of the file uploads that our client will do. All right, so here I'm going to go again to S3. So open your S3 bucket up here. Okay, and here I'm going to say create bucket, and I can actually just use, all right, so let's just create a new bucket. So I'm going to say, so this bucket is going to be my PHP web app, all right, bucket. Okay, and I really don't need to do anything here, right? So I can just go all the way down and then say create bucket. Now my bucket does not have to be public. I don't need to open my bucket to anybody, right? It can just remain private, right? So you don't need to put any policy here. So that's the purpose of the rule that we created earlier, all right? So that's the purpose of the rule we created earlier. So here, copy your bucket name. I mean, we're going to need that. So, and then you replace that with what you have right here. So change that. all right, to this particular name. Ensure that you don't have any white spaces. Okay, that is very, very important. Ensure you don't have any white spaces, very important. All right. Now that is done. So what's the next thing we need to do now? So bucket has been created, RDS has been created, parameter store has been done. So the next thing we need to do now is to basically, all right, set up our elastic beanstalk, right? So that's the next thing we need, all right, to do. So I'm going to go here again, and I'm going to go to my elastic, all right, beanstalk. Okay, so I'm going to open that up. All right, so I'm going to open up my elastic beanstalk. So let's see how to go about it. Now, elastic beanstalk is actually an end-to-end web application management, which is something that you can call a serverless, all right, kind of a way to host your web application in a serverless fashion, which means I don't have to create any EC2 instance. I don't need to do any of things like that. All right, Elastic Beanstalk can take care of all of the underlying, all right, resources for me. All I need to do is just to take my code and then put that, all right, on Elastic Beanstalk, and Elastic Beanstalk will do all the heavy lifting, all right, for me. So I'm going to show you now how to use Elastic Beanstalk. So here, create application, and I'm going to be selecting web server environment, right? So here, my application name, so let's say my application is a PHP web app. I mean, that's the application. All right. So here, I can leave the domain blank, right? I don't need to do anything here with the domain. It can be blank. And here, I need to select the platform. So what platform do I want to use? So my application is a PHP application. Okay. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to select PHP. As you can see from here, there are different application types or platforms. You can use Go, Java, Node.js, Ruby, Tomcat, all right, even Docker. Okay, if you have a Docker application, you can also use that. So, but we are using a PHP application. So I'm going to select PHP. And of course, I'm going to be using the latest version. So this is 8.3. That's the latest stable version. All right. So there's PHP 8.4 already, but I'm going to be using PHP 8.3 because that's the latest, all right, stable version. So I'm going to be using that version. And then here also, I'm going to be using this 433 recommended. And I'm going to be saying, just deploy a sample application for now, right? And I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to select custom configuration. Okay. So next. All right, so click on next, and then, so here it says use an existing role. Now, we don't have any, all right, existing service role, right? Now, here, there are two things you need to understand. There's what you call service role, and there's what you call instance profile, all right? There's service role, and there's instance profile. Is that okay? Service role and what? An instance profile. Now, service role is what allows your Elastic Beanstalk, all right, to assume, any role that allows you to basically, create your EC2 instances and things like that. Okay? Because Elastic Beanstalk will have to create EC2 instances. Okay? So it needs a service role that will allow it to create those EC2 instances, create a security group for them, and all those kind of things. So that's what a service role does. Okay, now EC2 instance profile, all right, what that one does is that any role that you create, particularly the IAM role that you created earlier. Now, the purpose of the IAM role, that, like we said, is that we want our Elastic Beanstalk to be able to fetch credential from parameter store and put objects right in our bucket. So that is where your instance profile comes into the picture. So which means if there's anything you want your web application to be able to do, all right, within the AWS environment, then you can create an instance role for that purpose. All right. So the service role will allow Elastic Beanstalk to create your EC2 instance, create your load balancer, create your auto scaling group, create your security group, and all of that. But then if there's any, all right, specific thing that your application requires outside of all of that, then you need to create an instance profile, which is also your role, all right, as well. So I don't have any role created. So I'm just going to say here and say create and use a new service role, which means I'm telling Elastic Beanstalk to basically just create that, all right, by itself. Okay. So here I'm going to select, I don't have any security group. So sorry, I don't have any EC2 key pair. So I don't need to create anyone actually. So I don't need that anyway. So I can leave that as is. So for the EC2 instance profile, I'm going to select the web app role that we created earlier. Remember? So I'm going to select that. So I'm going to say next. All right. So click on next. So here I'm going to be selecting my VPC. So don't forget to choose your VPC right here. So that's your VPC that we created together. Now for the instance settings. So my instance is going to be in the private subnet, not the public subnet. All right. My instance is going to be what? In the private subnet, not, all right, the public subnet. Okay. So here instance settings, I'm going to come here And I'm going to be choosing, all right, my private subnet. So these are my two private subnets. I'm going to select that. All right, because I mean, my instance should not be public. I mean, I have a private subnet, there's a NAT gateway configured. So I'm going to go with the private subnet, okay? Now here you can configure database, but of course we've created the database already, because any database you created here is tied to the lifespan of your Beanstalk environment. So which means the moment you terminate that environment, the database is also, all right, deleted. So you're not going to create any database here. So I'm going to scroll all the way down, and then I'm going to say next. Okay. So say next here. So now I'm going to scroll down. So here, I won't choose any security group here because Elastic Beanstalk, using the service role, will create its own, all right, security group for my load balancer and for my, all right, EC2 instances. So I'm not going to choose anyone here. Now here, we're going to be doing a load balanced deployment, which means we want to use a load balancer. We are going to be deploying two instances that will be load balanced, okay? So I'm going to say load balanced, and the instance, I'm going to say 2, and I'm going to come here and say 2, right? So which means I need 2 instances, okay? Basically to load balance my traffic. I mean, one should be in 1A, one should be in 1B, so that if 1B is down, 1A can still be serving our client, which is best practice actually. So I'm going to scroll all the way down here, and of course, to keep things within, to keep our expenses manageable. So I'm going to be going with the T2, all right, micro. All right, so T2 micro, that's what I'm going to be using. I'm going to remove this T3 micro, all right, just to stay within the free tier. All right, so here I'm going to scroll down. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down here. Now, your load balancer is going to usually be in the public, all right, subnet, because I mean, your load balancer should be accessible publicly, okay? So I'm going to be creating, all right, that as well. So I'm going to be selecting my public instance, public subnet for that, not private subnet, okay? Because your load balancer is a public facing, all right, service, okay? So that has to be the public subnet. So I'm going to select here, all right? So, and it's going to be an application load balancer anyway. Okay, because I mean, what I'm trying to do is an HTTP and an HTTPS traffic. I'm not trying to load balance a TCP traffic. Okay, it's a web application, so it has to be HTTP or HTTPS. Okay, so here I'm going to leave all of these by default. So this is a listener. I mean, that's my load balancer is going to be listening on port 3000. Sorry, port 80 rather. The process, which is the application itself, right? It's also a web application, so it's going to be on port 80 also. And I don't need to do any other thing here. So I'm going to say next. All right. So say next there. And here we don't need to do anything basically. All right. But one thing I want to show you here is this, all right, update. So which means update here basically is how do you want to update your application? So which means if there's a new version of your application, how do you want the updates to happen? Do you want to update all at once, or you want to update on a rolling basis, right? All at once means, all right, by the time you want to update your application, it means that all your instances will be down and then the update will happen. That means you're going to have a downtime, which is not okay in a production environment. So in a normal production environment, what you want to do is to say rolling. And then here, the deployment batch size, we can say 50%. So 50% means if I have 2 instances, it means that one instance will be updated first, and then the next one will be updated once the first one is, is done with the update, right? So that's what it means. Okay, so depending on the number of instances you have. So in our own case, we have 2 instances. So what that means is that one instance will get updated first, we add it back to the load balancer, and then once that instance is ready, my application will start, it will become accessible, and then the next instance will now, go through the process, of update. So that is what the rolling update basically means. Because if I come here and I say, all at once, it means I'm updating all my instances at once, and that means I'm going to have a downtime, and that's not what we want. All right. So here I can go down again, and now you can see here that your Elastic Beanstalk also uses a proxy server, which is Nginx. I mean, you can also use Apache as well, but here it uses Nginx by default. So which means Nginx, is going to act as the proxy, which means by the time you're accessing your resources, you're going to be going through the Nginx, web server, and then the Nginx web server is going to redirect the traffic to your instance or to the actual application that you have running. So that's what this is. And once all of that is done, basically just click here to say next. All right, and then you scroll all the way down and say submit. So now, the environment will be, it will start being created. So here, The Elastic Beanstalk, all right, is being created at this point. So we're going to have to wait a little bit, okay, for this environment to get created, all right, and see what happens, all right, as we go on. Okay, so let's wait here, all right, for this environment to get created. And once the environment has been created, of course, we can come back and start the process of packaging our application and deploying our application, all right, on Elastic Beanstalk. So let's wait a few minutes for these, all right, to wrap up. Okay, so let's wait a few minutes for these to basically, all right, wrap up here. Okay, if you have any question, you can put it in the chat, all right, on YouTube, and I will take your questions and answer, all right, whatever question that you may have. Is that okay? All right, so you just have to wait. So I'm going to wait also and just, put a comment there on, all right, on LinkedIn for those who may be interested. Okay, I'm going to just, all right, for those who want to basically, for those who want to just follow us, right, I'm just going to put something there, all right, on LinkedIn for them to, just follow us, all right? So let me just put a post here. Okay, so the environment is still getting created. Okay, so if you scroll down, you can see some events here, right? So if you scroll all the way down here, you can see some events going on here. Okay, these are events. So instance has been deployed. You know, yeah, so you didn't include a composer.json file. I mean, we're going to go into that, all right, as well. I'm going to tell you exactly what a composer.json, all right, is, what a composer.json does. I'm going to tell you, all right, what this file is about, okay? And then here you can see all those things that have been created. Now, the beauty of Elastic Beanstalk is that it actually just, automates everything for you. I mean, if you want to start creating your EC2, your load balancer, your auto scaling group, I mean, from the scratch, it's going to take you, all right, some time to do that, all right? But with Elastic Beanstalk, everything is actually created for you, all right, automatically. So I don't have to create my load balancer myself. I don't have to create my auto scaling group myself and all of that, right? Elastic Beanstalk will basically just take care, all right, of all of those things. Is that okay? That's the beauty, all right, of Elastic Beanstalk. Now, the environment that here has been created. Okay, just 1 minute, guys. So I just want to quickly put something on the Instagram page for those who are interested in following us as well, all right, on Instagram. So let me quickly just drop something, all right, on the Instagram page as well. Okay, now, like I said, the beauty of the Elastic Beanstalk, all right, is that it creates everything for us automatically. I mean, we don't have to create all of those things, by ourselves, one after the other. All right, and that's the beauty, all right, of Elastic Beanstalk. So now it says successfully launched environment python.dev. Now let's just quickly do a walkthrough of what Elastic Beanstalk, all right, has created. So if I come here to my let me go to my EC2. Okay, so let me click on EC2, and then let me show you what Elastic Beanstalk, all right, has created for us. Now, if you go to instances, I mean, we didn't create any instance, right? But here you can see that Elastic Beanstalk created 2 instances, all right, and those 2 instances were put, all right, in different availability zones, so 1A and 1B, all right. Elastic Beanstalk did all of that for us. Now, if you come here again to security group, now you're going to see that Elastic Beanstalk also has created 2 security groups for us. So there's this one, and then there's this other one. So what's the difference between the two? Right now, this one here is the security group of your instance, and this one is the security group of the load balancer. Okay, so now what we need to do now, since our application is going to be interacting with our database, we need to open up our database here. All right, click on action, edit inbound rule. All right, and then we're going to delete this one because I mean this is just a placeholder, right? So we're going to delete this one, hard rule, and then here I'm going to come back and say my SQL, but this time around I want it to allow traffic only from the Elastic Beanstalk security group. All right, stop. So this one here, not this one, because this one is for the load balancer, but this one is what we're going to use, right? So this one is the one attached to our instances, right? And this one is for the load balancer, okay? So I'm going to select this, all right, and then I'm going to save the rule. So that means my instance now is able to what? To talk to, all right, my database, okay? Now, again, if you go here to the load balancer, if you scroll down to load balancers, all right, you're going to see that Elastic Beanstalk again has created another load balancer for us, right? So it created a load balancer for us, created a listener rule and everything. I mean, it just makes life easy, all right? And then you can see the endpoint of your load balancer right here. This is the DNS, all right, of your load balancer, okay? And if you go here to target groups, Elastic Beanstalk has created the target group also, and it has also added the instances to the target group. So these are things we don't have to bother about when we are, when we're using services like this. All right, and that is basically the idea, all right, behind serverless. Serverless basically means, all right, you don't have to manage all of these servers. So you can, AWS can take care of all of these things, all right, for you. Okay, so that's basically what serverless is about. All right, so here, so having shown you all of that, now the next thing we need to do basically is that if I go back to my Elastic Beanstalk, this is my domain name, which is my endpoint to my Elastic Beanstalk. So if I click on this, it's going to open up in a new tab for me. And you can see here, it says, congratulations. All right, your PHP application is now running and all of that. I mean, congratulations. So you've been able to create an environment that is working and is accessible. The next thing we need to do now is to put our own application, all right, and deploy it to Elastic Beanstalk. So how do we do that? Now, I told us earlier here in this log, it says we didn't include a composer.json. Now, what is composer.json? A composer.json file is a file that is used to manage dependencies, all right, for your PHP application. All right. Now, the last project video that I uploaded, all right, last week Sunday, I talked about the Node.js, package.json, which is a file that is used to manage dependencies for the Node.js application. So in the same way, your PHP application also requires composer.json if your PHP application requires certain dependencies. Now, in our own case, our PHP application requires 2 dependencies. Number one is the AWS SDK, because our application has to talk, all right, to the parameter store on AWS, and of course, we're using an environment variable, all right, to reference that credential, all right, to basically pass in the credential to our application. So there are 2 dependencies that our application needs: AWS SDK and, all right, the environment, all right, dependent. So let me quickly show you. So here, if you look at my composer.json here, I have basically specified that my application requires what? AWS SDK and the version. And then it requires what? The php.env, because I am using what? An environment variable. Because my application is going to fetch the credential using this environment variable. Right? So this composer.json has to be bundled with my application code and then deployed, all right, on my Elastic Beanstalk in order for my application to work. Is that okay? So that is basically what the composer.json is about. So how do we bundle this particular application and deploy it, all right, to Elastic Beanstalk? So what we're going to do basically is we have these files, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So these are the 5 files that we need to package together and deploy, all right, to our Elastic Beanstalk, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come here. I mean, this is my application right here. So I'm going to select all of them like this. And then I'm going to right click and then say compress, all right, to zip file. So I'm going to create a zip file, all right, out of this, right? And then I'm going to refresh. So the zip file has been created. So if I open up the zip file, I can see all of the 5 files inside of the zip file. Okay. So I'm going to come here and then this is the zip file I want to upload, right? Basically. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to copy this zip file, right? I'm going to copy that on my desktop, right? So I'm going to put it on my desktop like this. Okay. And that's what I just want to do right there. Okay. So I'm going to put it on my desktop and then I'm going to go back to my Elastic Beanstalk environment. And then here, I'm going to click on upload and deploy. Upload. So I'm going to choose the file and then I'm going to come here to my desktop and then this is my file right here, script, right? So select that. And here you can see your deployment preference. So our deployment preference is rolling, which means, 50%. So which means the first instance will be updated or I put back into the Elastic load balancer. And then once it's ready, the second instance or I will also now be updated. Okay, so I've uploaded my file and then I'm going to come here and say deploy. So now Elastic Beanstalk is going to try to update, all right, our environment to start, all right, the deployment of our application, all right, process. So if you refresh, it says environment update is starting, updating environment PHP, all right, env configuration settings. So the update is going on right now. So if you go to the logs here, you're going to see how the update, all right, is going on. And of course, if you come here to your target group also and you refresh, all right, you should see some, all right, some update going on here. So is draining this particular instance and probably is going to recreate that instance and of course deploy our. Now you can see here that it's draining just one instance based on our deployment preference, right? That means if I come here again and I refresh this, my application is still what? Is still reachable. Do you see that? My environment is still what? It's still reachable because my deployment preference is rolling update, which means just do it one step at a time. So my application here is still what? Is still reachable. Okay, but if you look at it here, one instance is what? Is draining. And then another instance is, all right, is being registered right now to basically deploy my new application. But if I refresh here, I will see that I'm still seeing the same thing because, the older instance is still running, all right, still standing by, okay, just in case anything happens. And then it's doing it one instance at a time based on, all right, the rolling deployment preference that we chose. And if you look at it here now, this other instance is what? Is draining. Do you understand that? This one is now draining, and this one is now what? Is now healthy. So that means if I come back here now and I refresh, I should see, all right, my application up and running. Do you understand that now? My application is now what? Up and running. Meanwhile, behind the scene, the second instance is what? Is draining behind the scene. You can see that it's no longer there because Elastic Beanstalk will try to recreate it and then deploy our application, all right, on that instance. Do you see that now? So now this one is now initializing, being added back to the target group, and of course to register that to the load balancer, all right, as well. And if I go back to my environment right here and I refresh, it tells me here, it says completed application deployment, registering instances with the load balancer and waiting for them to be healthy. Command execution completed on 2 of 2 instances in environment. That is why we can actually see our application right here. So this is the application that we have deployed. So we're going to put a name, email, all right, message, and then we expect our applicants to basically upload. So this is an application that you can use maybe to collect, maybe somebody wants to submit a form or they want to make an inquiry, things like that. It's just a simple application that we can actually use, okay? Now, we can go back to the environment, refresh, all right? And of course, it says here that our environment is still pending, but of course, we can see clearly, all right, from here, okay, that our environment is actually up and running. Our application is up and running. And if I go to my target group and I refresh, I can see that it says my 2 instances are what? My 2 instances are healthy. Okay, and even if I go to my load balancer as well, if I go to my load balancer, all right, and I pick the load balancer's endpoint, I am still able, all right, to access my application, even using the load balancer's, all right, endpoint as well. Okay, so that is basically what I want to show. So now let's test our application. We have to test to be sure that, everything we configured is actually correct, all right, so that we don't just assume that things are fine. So I'm just going to put my name here, put my email, And then here I can just say, welcome. I mean, this information will actually go into the database. Okay. The only thing that will go into the S3 bucket is the file that our users will upload right here. Okay. So if they upload any file, all right, if they upload any file from here, that should go to the S3 bucket. So if I click on browse, all right, I can pick any file, just any file, right? And then I can say submit. And if everything is actually working fine, oops, so request entity too large. Oh, okay, so that says the file is too large. So we can upload another one. So I can come here, all right, just look for any other file that is not too large, and I can say submit. And if everything is fine, look at what you have. Message sent successfully. That means the application worked. Connection to the database worked. Connection to S3 bucket worked. All right, and then we have, all right, an application deployed on AWS. So if I go to my bucket now and I refresh, there you go. Look at the folder created, and then the file is uploaded. So that is, all right, the purpose of using elasticbeanstalk to deploy, all right, our application. So now the beauty of this is that we didn't have to worry about deploying the EC2 instance. We didn't have to go through the stress of creating the load balancer, creating the auto scaling group. All right, the only thing we had to create was the database, all right, the S3 bucket, the parameter store, and all of that. So now we have a fully functional, all right, application that is connected to the S3 bucket, all right, fetching the credential from parameter store, all right, putting the data in the database and all of that. So now if I come back here again and I put a different name, all right, maybe I just say, maybe KeyCare, for example, all right, and just say another thing, and I can just say, all right, hello something, all right, I mean, just to test, and then I browse again, and then here maybe I select another application, for example, and I click on submit, all right, it says here, message sent successfully, and if I go back to my bucket and I refresh, I should see the other application right here. So that means there's a connection between our bucket and the application. And I didn't have to expose my bucket to the public. I only did it using the IAM role. So this application is talking to my bucket using the IAM role, all right? And it's also talking to my parameter store using the IAM role and all of that. So guys, thank you so much for joining me, all right, on this session. I'm sure we've learned, quite a number of things here, all right, on how to deploy an application using elasticbeanstalk on AWS. Now, if you have any question, you can put it in the comment on the YouTube session. You can reach out to me on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and also the code that we used here is going to be made available, all right, in my GitHub repo. My GitHub repo is publicly accessible for anyone, all right, to use. So I'm just going to come here and push, all right, those changes here to the repo. So I'm going to just come here and say git add, all right. We've talked about Git already. So if you go to the YouTube channel, just check the DevOps free course playlist. You're going to see, all right, how to use Git exactly from there. All right, so I'm just going to say env updated, all right, and then I'm going to push, all right, everything here. So git push, all right, and all right, that's all I have to do. So the repo is publicly accessible, so you can access the repo from here. I think if you go here to, let me see, PHP web app, all right, so there's a repo here, and then the branch is actually contact form. So that's the branch, because there are a lot of branches there. So the branch is contact form, so you can clone the repository, all right, and basically just follow along what I just did, all right. We still have some other amazing project video coming up on Jenkins, Docker, Kubernetes, and all of that. But of course, it's always good to take things one step, all right, at a time. So thank you so much, guys. So now the next thing we just need to do very quickly is that we need to clear our environment. We need to delete some things, okay, so that we don't get built unnecessarily, okay? So we need to basically clear, all right, our environment, okay? So we need to clear, all right, our environment, all right? So let's quickly do that, all right? Let's clear out our environment so that, all right, so that we don't have, so that we don't have to pay all right, unnecessary fee. Okay, so let's quickly do that. So here I'm going to say action, then oops, what did I press? All right, sorry. So I'm going to come here to say, so select your database, all right, action and delete. Okay, so I'm not going to create a final snapshot. Please take note of these because it's a trap. But let me use that word. If you create a final snapshot, that means you're going to be charged for that snapshot. So just you don't need any snapshot. All right, and then here, just put delete me right here. Okay, delete me, all right, and then delete your database. It is important that once you're done with anything you're doing on AWS, make sure you clear your environment, all right, immediately. Very important, guys. Very, very important, okay? Now go back to your security group here, all right, and basically just, delete the association that we did. So delete that, save the rules, and then go back to your environment and come here to actions and terminate your environment, all right? So you're going to put your environment name here, all right? So put your environment name here and click on terminate. So that will delete your Elastic Beanstalk environment. And most importantly also, that will delete the load balancer, everything for you. And by the way, let me just say this here. The Elastic Beanstalk actually uses CloudFormation to create your resources behind the scene. If I go to CloudFormation, all right, CloudFormation, right? I should actually see, the behind the scene of what Elastic Beanstalk actually is doing. Look at it here. So for some of us who want to learn Terraform, you just want to learn Terraform, learning CloudFormation is also very important because every service, every serverless service on AWS actually uses CloudFormation behind the scene. Okay, so CloudFormation is also something to know in addition to Terraform. Okay, because now this is the deletion. I terminated the environment, and then that has triggered a deletion right in my CloudFormation, right? So it's deleting everything now. Everything that has been created, CloudFormation is deleting that. So every serverless resources on AWS uses CloudFormation behind the scene to provision those resources. So let's take note of that. All right, I just thought to show you that. So the next thing I need to delete here, very important, guys, is my NAT gateway. Very, very important because the NAT gateway is not free. All right, so make sure you delete it. Okay, so delete your NAT gateway. Very, very important. All right, if you leave it running, I'm sure you're going to have a lot of bills to pay for that. So make sure you delete, all right, your NAT gateway. Very, very important. It's an expensive service. Okay, so please delete it as soon as you're done. And once you delete your NAT gateway, you have to wait for the NAT gateway to be deleted. And then you need to go to the Elastic IP after the NAT gateway has been deleted to release your Elastic IP. Because if you don't release your Elastic IP, you're going to be charged, all right, for that also. So take note of all of these things, all right, as well. Okay? All right, so take note of all of that. So we are basically deleting our environment now. Of course, if you have any questions, like I said, you can ask your questions now. All right. And so basically deleting all the things in the environment. So delete your NAT gateway and also release your Elastic IP, all right, address. Okay. So take note of that also. All right. So application, of course, it won't be available anymore. Okay. So just take note of all of that. So guys, thank you so much. All right. If you have any question, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, on the YouTube channel as well. All right. I'll be happy to answer any of your questions. All right. So thank you so much. All right. And I'll see you, okay, on the next one, next week, Sunday, as we get together again to learn, all right, sharpen our skills. Okay. So thank you. All right. And I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.